Good evening, and welcome to another one of our Tring Book Festival events. It's this event marks the halfway stage of the festival, which just exhausts me just to think about it. It's an absolute honour. During lockdown, I got to interview our author this evening, and it's possibly one of the most emotional moments of my life, actually. And the moment I ended the event, it was a Zoomed event to loads of schools. I actually just burst into tears afterwards. It was just the most extraordinary thing, and he is so amazing. And I hope there's one or two kids who watched that event watching. But weirdly, I also got to interview our host tonight. So I can't tell you what joy it is to have the pair of them on stage together. So without further ado, can I welcome to the stage our host for the evening, Hannah Gold.
Right, thank you so much for having me, and obviously Michael, who we'll talk about in a minute. As I walked up on stage, I almost tripped over, which is not the kind of the welcome back I would have liked. I grew up in Tring, and it was with great joy that I find myself back here tonight as an author, interviewing one of my author heroes. So what can we say about Michael? One of the UK's best loved children's authors and storytellers. Michael was appointed the Children's Laureate in 2003, awarded an OBE in 2007, and a knighthood in 2018. It's a long intro. For services to literature and charity, he's written over 130 books, including one of my favorites, The Butterfly Lion, Kenzuki's Kingdom, Private Peaceful, Why the Whales Came, Shadow, and one of his most famous books, War Horse, which is adapted by the National Theatre. And if you've never seen it, please go and see that. It's just the most incredible experience seeing that live. And also was a film directed by Steven Spielberg. He's won numerous awards, and with his wife Claire, set up the charity Farms for City Children, which offers children and teachers from inner city primary schools the chance to live and work in the countryside. But most importantly, he's one of my author heroes, and I'm so honoured that he's here tonight to share this experience with us. So please welcome to the stage, Michael Morpurgo.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Tring. Love to be back here. I was here once before, which was a book thing as well. There's a place down the road here where it seemed like an art college where there were children who were ballet dancers gathered for, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, rehearsing a ballet which had been made by a wonderful composer called Stephen Barlow, about a book of mine called The Rainbow Bear. And then they did it and they brought it up to London. And I went to see it, and it was out of this world. So my connection to Tring is all to do with bears. And then she's written a book about a bear. What is it about bears? We've got a problem with bears in children's books, haven't we? But there we are. We're all trying to keep up with Winnie the Pooh. That's what it is.
Actually, that was going to be my first question. Had you been to Tring before, which you've just kindly answered. So we're going to go straight into talking about this wonderful book, When Fishes Flew. So can you tell us a little bit about it and your inspiration behind the story?
Yes, I'd love to. Well, it was the book was written during the pandemic, but the reason I wrote it happened just before. Claire, my wife, who's here this evening somewhere, she always hides. Actually, I don't think she's hiding. I think she's gone for a cafe or a drink down there. Anyway, she is very keen on Greece. I'm keen on Greece. We met on Corfu about 59 years ago, and I'm not exaggerating. It's serious stuff. Normally when people say that, they give a clap. Would you please just give that a clap? Anyway, we met there a long time ago, so Greece is rather favourite with us. And for a reason I'm not quite sure now, we went to visit an island called Ithaca. I think it had something to do with another decent writer called Homer, who had lived there and written, of course, his great Odyssey. And in the story, as all of you will know, the great hero, Odysseus, came back from the Trojan Wars after 10 years, and we found ourselves literally staying on the beach where, in legend, he got out of his boat after being away from his wife Penelope for 10 years, and she was up in the palace trying to fend off the suitors by knitting and knitting and knitting, you know the story. And he got off the boat and he walked up our beach. And I was sitting on the beach every day reading a new translation of the Odyssey, which I hadn't read for years and years and years, and enjoying it for the first time, really enjoying it, not because it was a classic, but because I was in the place it was written, it was about here. I felt the story for the first time. Anyway, we were just having a normal day on the beach, really doing that. It was quite a quiet beach, hardly anyone there. And at about 5 o'clock every evening, a Greek family would come down to the shore and really take possession of their beach once any touristic people had gone except us. And it was a lovely family, an old lady, a matriarch who was dressed in long black, clearly a widow, and the family and the kids jumping off the little quay that was there. And very interesting thing that you notice in waters which are warm is that quite a lot, people don't swim all that much. They stand in the water up to here talking. It's just, you can't do that in Cornwall, you die, you know? It's just so lovely to watch. Everything was really relaxed and wonderful. And then we noticed this old lady walking along. Wasn't just walking, she had a bit of a bag with her always, a sort of shopping bag. And she was bending down, picking up plastic or bits and bobs washed up by the sea. Each day she did this. It was clearly her duty in her head to keep this beach clean. So Claire and I thought this was rather wonderful, and we didn't converse with her, but occasionally we waved, that's all. One day, and this is true, the story I'm about to tell you. I know I'm a fiction writer, but I'm about to tell you truth. I'm in a chapel, I will tell you truth. This is what happened. This wonderful lady was bending down, as she often did, but then suddenly she picked up something in her hands like this and held it up to us and said, come. She never spoke to us before, so we went over. And in her hand, she had a flying fish. And she said in quite halting English, it is dying. And then she said something which took my breath away and will probably quite surprise you. She said, they talk, you know. And we must have looked at her a bit oddly. But she said, no, they talk. Watch. And she took her finger and she started stroking the head of this flying fish. And the flying fish went, I looked at my wife to make sure that this was real, that she wasn't actually doing some sort of extraordinary ventriloquism of one sort or another. No, it kept doing it. That evening, we were just talking about nothing but talking flying fish. We went to the taverna, as you do, what else have you got to do? And we were walking back from this little taverna round the sort of the bay, a place called Vathi, which is the main town there. And another thing happened, which was just amazing, and the two stories came together to make my book. So I'd had the flying fish, and in my head already, because I was a bit soaked in Greek gods and Greek myths, already this fish was a god called Proteus, who could change himself into anything he wished to be. He had changed himself into a flying fish, and he had talked to me. We worked all this out at the taverna. We were walking back along the path, and there were houses on one side, small road, a wall, and then the port. Beautiful. Just walking along in the half light. And as we came past one of the houses, an ordinary bungalow place, painted yellow, I remember that. There was a man sitting on the veranda, an old man, even older than me. And you've got to say something. We were that close, you've got to say something. So I said to him, in my best Greek, I said, hello, but in Greek. And he said, hello. And I said, you're not Greek, are you? And he said, yeah, I am, but I'm also Australian. And you're a pom. So we had a bit of a conversation. And then he started to tell me his story. And his story was, because I said, what are you doing here? Isn't it wonderful? You're sitting here in this wonderful place. How come, if you're Australian? He said, I was born here. Aged 5, there was a terrible earthquake in this place. And many, many people in the island were killed, as happened on Kefalonia, just across the water. And my family's house, which stood where this house is now, was wrecked. Some of my family died. I had nowhere else to go except to relatives in Melbourne, Australia. So I went to Melbourne, Australia at age 5. I settled in Australia. I did what I did. And I had in my head and my heart that one day I would come back to Ithaca and I would build up a family home on the exact spot. That's what I've done. And then 4 months of every year I come back and I sit in this veranda and life is good. So I've been served up these 2 extraordinary stories in one day on this place. And I just thought you are going to have to tell the story. It must be in touch with ancient Greece, because I was. It must be in touch with modern Greece because of the earthquake. And I knew enough of modern Greece, as I expect many of you do as well, to know that in the Second World War it was occupied by the Germans and the Italians both, and terrible things were done on those islands, terrible things. And then you know now, if you didn't know before, about the earthquake in 1954, and if that wasn't enough within the space of 10 years or so, what happened next? A tyranny. The colonels came in, the fascists came in, and started putting people in prison, and people were disappearing. It was dreadful times. And as if that wasn't enough, what's the modern issue in Greece? Well, it's the issue which affects the whole world and affects us. It is those people who are seeking refuge from wherever they're coming in their country, and they are much nearer to that than we are. So refugees, as we know, are pouring into Greece from Turkey, and that's the new great problem. And I thought, have a heroine actually, who is there throughout all these changes. And I guess it was the pandemic that made me do that. Because in my lifetime, there have been 2 big things. One I wasn't conscious of, which was the end of the Second World War. I was born in 1943. I'm sure you thought I was younger, but I'm not. 1943, which means that I grew up with no knowledge of the bombing or anything like that. But I did grow up in the aftermath of the war. I remember the greyness, and I remember the sorrow, and I remember the photograph on the mantelpiece of Al sitting with a picture of my uncle, who I never knew because he was killed in the RAF in 1941. I grew up with all that. And that was the massive thing when I was little, everyone was growing out of, trying to find a way to chase away the sadness and bring some gladness into life. And then we had a new queen, and it did look better. And there was an exhibition in London and all that. There were little moments, and we climbed Everest. And I did the 4-minute mile. I was called Bannister in those days, but what I'm saying is that there were moments of great gladness, and that's the way. And then, of course, we've had the pandemic, the other major tragedy, and it really is just so massive. We're sort of, we hope at the tail end of it, but I don't think you know till you distance yourself from it how awful it's been in people's lives. So I thought, try to write a story which connects up events in your life and how you deal with them. Sorry, I've talked too much.
No, it's incredible listening to you talk, because having read the book, which is amazing, and it just encompasses so many different themes. And one of, like you said before, it's like, well, backstage, I have to admit, it's the first element of fantasy you've ever incorporated one of your books. It encompasses the Second World War. It touches a little bit upon climate change. It talks about the heroicism of the everyday person rather than the quiet heroic acts that we all do. So it's got so many huge themes. how did you go about just even managing to kind of get them all in such a seamless way?
Well, I mean, I suppose, a storyteller at heart, and I love weaving, which is what stories are all about. They're not just monodirectional. They accept other influences coming in the whole time. And what was wonderful about this story is that it's huge. I mean, it encompasses thousands and thousands of years and many, many lives. It travels the world from Australia to Ithaca. It has this flying fish in the middle of it. And
it's got dual timelines as well, and it's different the way it's written as well. It's got the diary excerpts. It's got just different. It's a really complex, but actually like a really simple book as well at the same time.
Well, it needed. I quite like being called simple and complex.
Yeah.
No. It's good, because actually, if it's too simple, then boring. You don't want to know. But if complexity comes in and makes you wonder, makes you ask questions, if it broadens your knowledge and understanding. Well, I was massively broadened by the writing of this book. I got to know Greek history like I'd never known it before. And I also am fascinated by, and again, this was from the pandemic. It's from something now which wove itself in without my even thinking of it. I think we all know, I think maybe we all knew before, but it's been reinforced that the real heroes are not what people call these days celebrities. It's got nothing to do with it. We all know the real heroes are quiet. They just do what they do. Yes, they are our nurses and our doctors and our teachers and the people who look after us in other parts of our lives, carers. These are the real heroes. Mostly they don't get medals. Mostly no one applauds them. But to me, these are, and the lady at the center of this story is exactly that. She simply does what events around her demand of her. So during the First World War, the Second World War, when they're invaded, she helps her brother in the resistance, quietly. Never tells about it afterwards, no one talks about it afterwards. She just does what she does with unspeakable courage in the middle of a hideous sort of tyranny which has visited their island. And then when it comes to the earthquake, she's the one who has lots of families who've got nowhere to go to live in her place, and they camp in the garden and they come inside and she's the mother of all these people. Sometimes there are children on their own. And it's time and time again, when it comes to the fascists coming in, she resists. She's not going to put up with it, She's seen this before, and she's not going to put up with it, whether it's Greek or whether it's Italian or German or whatever. And she ends up in prison and meets a wonderful man there who some of you will know, called Mikis Theodorakis, great composer. He's over the Greek. No, I won't dance it, but you know what I'm talking about. And all this comes into the story. It's just woven in because that's what I thought of when I wrote it. Do you know how instinctive writing is? It's the plotting and the planning. I know children are often taught you've got to plan, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No. Because if you plan it, the reader will soon suss out where it's going, because you know where it's going and you write into the plan. The great thing, I think, for me as a storyteller, is to allow the story in the end to tell itself, for the characters to develop and take you in a direction which you didn't even expect in the first place.
I think you really get that as well, because it's told from the point of view of Nandi, who lives in Australia.
Yep.
And she's kind of got this issue about, is she kind of Greek or is she Australian? This was like identity sort of confusion about where she really belongs.
Yep.
She's completely adores her grandmother, Elena. And so great aunt, sorry.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, and then so she goes.
Elena would be really cross if you confused it. That's
yes, you're right. The grandmother. Okay, so she goes. She adores her great aunt, and she goes on her own kind of like odyssey across the world to Ithaca,
which Australians do.
Yeah.
Are there any Australians here, by the way? Put up your hand. Confess it.
There's one at the back.
Is there one?
Yeah.
Yay! Give a clap, please. A real Aussie. Well, he's probably here doing exactly that, actually. They do travel. Also, they put on knapsacks, don't they?
You got a picture of the rucksack in the book, which I really love. A picture of the
Australian rucksack. They put on knapsacks and they head towards us. Sometimes it's got their relations here, they got roots here. And they travel around and they explore the world. Most of them go back.
Rites of passage.
Rites of passage stuff. Anyway, so that's, sorry. Welcome. Where are you from? Oh, sorry. No, it's just that Warhorse went to Sydney, and I was very pleased with it in Australia. I went to see it, of course you do. but they put it in a rubbish theatre. It was connected to a gambling hall. I mean, what's that all about? We have Stratford-on-Avon and you have a gambling hall. Nice to see you.
I love it. So she goes on her odyssey to find her great aunt, and she's kind of on her own journey as well. That's what I really love about it. And then this aunt is so unassuming on the surface, and she realizes she doesn't really know much about her.
Yeah.
But then when she discovers her story via a talking fish, okay, that's when she realizes how incredible her great aunt really is, which talks about the hero within, which is one of my favorite themes from the book.
It is, and what's wonderful about the fish is that you do gather reasonably soon that there's something about this fish that is not just fish. Because it's the fish that's arranged everything. He's a god, right? He's arranged it. He first meets the girl on the river in Melbourne. Much nicer city, by the way, than... and then they see each other. Of course, the girl knows any significance about that. But from then on, this god is arranging this girl to go and meet her great aunt, which is what she's plotted to do anyway, but also really wants her to discover what an extraordinary woman she is. There's a reason for that too. I've got quite old, not just recently, it's happened quite slowly. And one thing I have learnt, and that is that old people are very often thought of as just old. Your grandpa, your grandma. And young people, it's not because they're nasty, it's just that they're living in their own bubble. And they don't realize that you've had a life. You've done stuff, been places. Very often they're not interested in your world, they have their own world, which is immediate. And very often people, I think old people simply get forgotten about in terms of the richness of their life and what they've given to other people and what they've done. And I think as I get older, I'm aware of the fact that you must tell your story. Not in a boastful way, but we all have stories to tell. We have stories to pass on. It's there's a wonderful play called The History Boys. I don't know if any of you have seen it. And there's a teacher in that, and it comes up at one moment. What are we doing this for? One thing, to pass it on. Let's just pass it on. And when you get older, you discover that is all you're here for. And if the children don't ask the question, the young people, a lot of old people find themselves in old people's homes, sometimes quite very alone, not having told their story, and they've had these amazing lives. And this woman is very like that. She's not patronized, it's not nasty, it's just that there's a busy life going on around them, and she's very sweet, she brings presents, she loves doing Greek dancing, she loves doing Greek cooking when she comes to Australia, but they see her all on that level of just auntie, great auntie. She's much adored, but they don't think she's done anything. And so this God makes it his business to inform this wonderful girl, Nandi, that she has this extraordinary great aunt who is not just a great aunt, but an extraordinary person.
Do you think you'd like to read us a little bit from...
You think that's a good idea?
Yeah, I think that was a nice moment.
I think the best thing to do is to read right from the beginning in the hope that actually they'll like it enough to go and buy a copy.
Sure they will.
Well, I know there's no money in Tring. I've got to work hard at it, okay? First of all, I should tell you about the illustrator. There's a wonderful illustrator called George Butler, who's never illustrated a book before, in the sense of being an illustrator. He's an artist, and I'll tell you what he does. Many of you will know, thinking way back to the First World War and the Second World War, that there were war artists, people like Paul Nash, who, when the camera wasn't so important and when film wasn't so important, they drew, they painted. And this is what George Butler does. So he goes to Syria, and he goes to Jordan, and he goes to refugee camps, and he sits there with them, and he draws them, and it's unbelievably powerful drawings. But here's the beginning of the book. When fishes flew, you don't need to throw the book at me yet. When fishes flew. My glowing globe. I blame the globe, my glowing globe, and the flying fish. But I suppose I should also blame Elena, my great aunt who gave me the globe in the first place. She started this story and she ended it too. When I say blame, I don't mean blame, not really. I mean that without the globe and without my great aunt, none of the rest of the story would ever have happened. And it did happen. The flying fish happened. Really happened. I'm telling you, I saw him often. I was there, but more of him later, a lot more. It was also my great aunt who first gave me my name. My real name is Amanda, but whenever she came to stay with us when I was little, she always called me Nandi. I like that a lot better than Amanda or Mandy, which most people seem to want to call me. So I told everyone at school and at home that I was Nandi and that I wouldn't answer to any other name. I've been Nandi ever since. My great aunt, Elena, Auntie Ellie, I called her, came to stay with us about once every 2 years or so in our house in St Kilda in Melbourne, Australia. I longed for her visits because she always brought me interesting things from where she lived, which was far, far away on a Greek island called Ithaca. Every time she came, there would be presents, always Greek honey from her own, from her own bees for Papa, herbs from her garden, from Ma, oregano and sapsikos, meatballs mixed with sapsikos, cooked on the barbecue was my all-time favorite, still is. But the best gift she ever gave me was my glowing globe. There was a light inside, so my globe was a nightlight too. Auntie Ellie laughed a lot, talked quietly to me, listened to me. And when we went on walks along the Yarra River, she would often swing my hand, and I loved that. I treasured everything she gave me as I was growing up. My T-shirt with a Greek ship sailing across a deep blue sea, and another one with a huge wooden horse of Troy being hauled in through the gates of the city by those poor deluded Trojans. Then there was the silver dolphin and the small bronze statue of a helmeted Greek warrior from ancient times, his sword raised to fight off some hideous monster. She told me his name was Odysseus, and that he was born in Ithaca, like she was. These were my favorite things in all the world. It was my Auntie Ellie who first introduced me to the story of Odysseus. For her, and soon for me, the greatest of all the Greek heroes. She told me about their gods too, one way or another. My Auntie Ellie and those gods were going to change my life. The rest of the book is a lot better.
I could listen to you read all day. You're such a good reader, because when you're having to do your reading, sometimes you sort of stumble, and you really perform them. You just bring your
Well,
your
my
books
mum
to
was an
life.
actor. My dad was an actor, and I'm what's known as an actor manqué. I don't know who I could have been. Jimmy Stewart, perhaps. I don't know, someone like that, you know. Just never made it.
I can vouch that the rest of the book is just as amazing. I know, I'm fawning over you, so apologies. Talking about the illustrations, you talked about how good the illustrations are. What's interesting is that George, isn't it, George Butler, and he does this work with the Syrian refugee camps. And how did that collaboration work, without giving the story away too much? How did that influence what maybe happens towards the end of the book, and was it planned, or did it come in because of him, or?
Again, it's one of those things. You remember I talked about weaving. He became part of the story, really. But George is a remarkable young man, unique. I met him really because he spent a lot of time in Syria and was mortified by what had happened, as we all are, and set up a charity called Stand Up for Syria. And I met him because he invited me to read at a carol service in London to raise money for him. And liked him immensely. I saw his work. And what I wanted for this book was someone who was not going to illustrate it and make it something that it wasn't, who knew it from the ruins upwards. Because what happens so often in this story is that there's ruination and there's disaster. But the good thing about it is that there's hope. And he has hope. That's why he set up this extraordinary charity. And indeed, we all have to hope. We can even hope about Afghanistan. We don't have to throw up our hands in the air and say, isn't it terrible? We do something about it. And he did something about it. So I have huge respect for him. And I love a writer or an artist who means it, who really means it, not playing at it. And George is like that. So yeah, I very much wove his drawings into the whole theme of the book.
They're really great drawings as well, but talking about the theme of hope, which I know is something that you put in so much of your books. So we've got other books to talk about here. Are there any other books which you think strongly shine with the message of hope?
Well, I would say all of them. It's interesting because I think some people think that I write about war. That's because I wrote a book called War Horse. And then I wrote another one called Private Peaceful. And I wrote another one called this, another one called that. And the theme of many of them is war. However, I've never written a single book about war that is not actually about peace and reconciliation, finally. So the most important scene in War Horse, by far, is the moment in which a Tommy climbs out of his trench because this horse has got stuck in no man's land. And a German climbs out of his trench because he wants the horse as well, and they meet in the middle. And they toss a coin for this horse, and they shake hands, and they talk. Finally, that's what the story is about. And just to give you an idea of how powerful that can be, is at one point, the play of War Horse done by the National... Could you put up your hands, those of you who saw the play of War Horse? Higher, higher, I want you to be proud. Even the Australian... Where did you see it? In where? In London. Well, that's all right, that's fine. It was so powerful. And when they came to me and said they want to make a play of this thing, I thought, they said they want to make it with puppets. I said, you've got to be joking. Puppets? A story about the First World War? They said, yes, and they showed me this extraordinary video of these South African puppeteers who had created a giraffe, a life-size giraffe, and I saw it on a small screen in London, this giraffe walking across a studio floor with 3 puppeteers inside manipulating it. And I found myself crying. I had seen many giraffes in my time on film and in life, and then they had never made me cry before. And I asked myself why, and suddenly I knew why. Because what these people were doing was capturing the spirit of giraffe. And I just found that profoundly moving. Why? Because it's about the connection that we have between ourselves and our fellow creatures. It's extraordinarily powerful. And Tom Morris, who was the director who was responsible for putting this on the stage and had brought these puppeteers here, said, look, we can do it with a giraffe, we can do it with a horse. Do you believe us now? So I did, and there's this extraordinary show that happened. And it took me around the world. And what I was coming round to, and as you could see, I'd come round to things in a very, very slow fashion, was Germany. At one point, it traveled on its tours to Germany. So what did we have? We had a play about British Tommies and a horse. And it was all acted by German actors in German, and they were singing English folk songs in German, and they were doing it on a stage in Berlin, the only theatre which survived at all the bombardments of the Second World War. From the boxes up there in this theatre, the Kaiser had sat, Hitler had sat, all these monsters who went and created this hideous thing which happened to the world. And we were making a play about peace. And all that cast, these young Germans, understood completely that this was not about war. It was finally about the peace that we can all have. And I find that still enormously powerful. And that tends to come across in all the books that I've written. There's one I wrote called Kensky's Kingdom.
I love that one as well.
Put up your hands who read that one. It's not good enough, Tring. It's not good enough.
There's a few people there that didn't read it.
No. If I we'll have a test here. This is going to humiliate me, but I don't mind. Put up your hands, those of you who read Harry Potter. Right, I'm off. But one of the books I wrote, Kensuke's Kingdom, which I didn't know very many of, it's interesting simply because it looks like a story, a Treasure Island story. There's a man on an island. Actually, he's a Japanese soldier left behind after the Second World War on an island in the Coral Sea, and there were such people, 3 of them. And I read about one of them, and one of them was on an island for 27 years. Robinson's Stupid Crusoe was on for 4 years. This guy this guy was there really for 27 years before he was discovered and taken home. I was so amazed by that. And he had stayed there, like a lot of Japanese, because they didn't want to believe defeat had happened. They were not going to go back. It was too humiliating. So he stayed and he stayed and he stayed. Then this young boy falls off a ship, English boy, falls off a yacht. His mum and dad are on the yacht, and they're going by this island, and mum's sick, and she's down in the cabin, and dad's looking after mum, and the boy's on the deck. And the wind takes the sail, and he's in the sea, and he's in the sea, his dog's in the sea, he's in the sea, and the boat goes off in the darkness, and he swims, sharks, he gets to this island, thinks he's alone, no food, no water, no one, and he wakes up after 3 or 4 days of sort of starvation. There's a plate, and on the plate there's some fruit, and he doesn't know it, but he's fallen into this place where this Japanese man is living, a recluse, never wants to see anyone else again because he knows what a terrible place the world is. And the boy, of course, just wants to go home. They have to share the island. And it's about how these two get to know each other and get to live past the prejudice which this man has for the boy and the fear which the boy has for him. So it's a story of, yes, it's a story about reconciliation. Then there's the Mozart question, which I wrote, which was set in concentration camp. And it's about the people who played music, the orchestras that the Nazis forced to play music, so that when people got off the trains to go to where they were going, on the way into the work camp, the other way to the ovens, they played music. And much of it was happy music, march music, Mozart. And it's a story about 2 of those people who survive and come back, and the story of a young boy growing up with that story around him. Why do you write it? I didn't write it because I wished to dwell on the horrors of that, of course not. I wrote it because I wanted to make the point that music is more powerful than anything to do with that. And Mozart in particular for me, because he's my favorite man. So it always, I suppose, taking subjects that are dark, but breathing hope into them.
And you do that really well. And actually, we'll talk a couple minutes more, but if you've got any questions in the audience, start thinking now, because we're coming up to question time. So one final question. Actually, I wanted to read, going back to when fishes flew, I scoured the internet for a review, and I wanted to read this review to you.
Is it bad or good?
No, it's a good one. It's a good one. It's from Cecily, aged 10. Okay? And
well, we'll see if it's okay.
Children's reviews are actually the nicest because they're just so pure and honest. But Cecily says, I was extremely lucky to have been read the first few pages by Michael Morpurgo himself. 2 days ago, my class and I were delighted to go to Henley Literary Festival and listen to Michael Morpurgo. I think he is an inspirational author.
Oh, sweet child.
And this is one of his best books. Not just because he has a female protagonist and a female hero, which actually I agree with. It is nice to see a female hero here. It's a great story of discovery, intrigue with a mythical creature, the flying fish, and hope, set in beautiful Ithaca, full of Greek legends and history. It is so beautifully written that I pleaded with my parents to let me read on, and I finished it in just 2 sittings. It would have been 1, but I had to do my homework. I recommend this book to children aged 8 to 12 who love reading adventurous and intriguing books woven with legends and unshaken heroes. Aww.
What was her name?
Cecily.
Cecily. She was the one I paid.
Obviously quite a lot.
No, it's not. Well, it is lovely when you hear, yes, because you do give your heart and soul to a book, that's for sure. So when someone responds like that, it means a lot. And the wonderful thing about children is that, well, it isn't wonderful actually, because it can be quite difficult. They're usually quite honest. They sort of look you in the eye when they're saying things and they mean it. And that can be uncomfortable, but when it is like that, it makes you feel, yeah, well, eat your heart out, roll dog.
Right, should we take some questions? Are you ready for some questions?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Just put your hand up. I've got one, to kick things up from the virtual crowd. Neve, age 10. Where is your favourite place to write? Do you have a writing place down in Somerset?
Devon.
Oh, sorry, Devon.
Somerset. It'll be Australia next, I tell you.
Not Sydney, though.
No, Devon. I live in the middle of Devon, a tiny little place called Idisley. It's where Joey and Warhorse was born and where a lot of the stories happen. Have I got a place? I can write anywhere, as long as it's quiet, as long as I've had a good breakfast. My stomach is quite important to me. I'm contented from here upwards, I think. But the most important thing, it's funny enough, is the place that I write normally, which is on my bed. I write on my bed because at some point in my writing life, I think after about 10 years, I write quite feverishly when I write. And I write very, very small. And it gets small.
Do you handwrite?
People used to do that, you know. I mean, did you hear that? You handwrite? Yes, I mean, the trouble, I did try this what you did, yeah. But I lost 5 chapters. They're floating up above Tring somewhere. No, I have no confidence in that system at all. I mean, it is about confidence. And I do know that when I write, there's some connection between this and this and this and the page, and it's at the pace that I want to write. And also, when you cross out, you don't press a button and it disappears. You just put a line through. Therefore, you see what you put a line through, and you can recover. I just like the pace at which I do it. I'm not saying it's the best way, but look, it did all right for Shakespeare, for goodness sake.
I'm just intrigued.
And Dickens and Jane Austen, they all did this. They didn't have a machine.
The quill. You write with a quill
Yeah,
still?
well, it doesn't matter. So, yeah, I write, but I write sitting on my bed. I happen to know, I was really lucky, where I grew up in Devon, just down the road from us in Devon, there was a great writer called Ted Hughes. I happened to know him because he fished in the river just down on our farm. And we got to know him, and he helped the charity, Claire, my wife, created Farms for City Children hugely, and became a friend. And he also became a great writing mentor. He loved sharing notions about writing with young people. He encouraged young people a lot. He encouraged me when I was a young writer. And at some particular point, I had real pain in my shoulder when I was writing, because I was doing it too tightly like this. And I was leaning over a desk, and the whole thing was like that. I said, I'm just in agony doing it. And he said, yeah, I had that too. He said, well, I don't sit at a desk anymore. So what do you do? He said, well, I have an easel, and I stand up, and I put my paper on the easel, and I stand up, and I can write like this. So I thought, well, it's good for Ted Hughes, it's good for me. So we got myself an easel, and I stood there, and my feet hurt. Rubbish. The thing about poets is they write quite short. I'm writing novels, and it goes on and on and on, and your feet hurt. I told him this, I gave up. And then I got lucky. I read a book about my other writing mentors, a man called Robert Louis Stevenson, whose great book, Treasure Island, was the first book I ever truly loved. And I sort of followed him, and I read biographies of him quite a lot. I came across a photograph of him on the island where he died, on Samoa. And he was on his bed, and he had pillows piled up behind him, his knees drawn up in front of him, little notebook on his knees, and he looked happy as you like. So I thought, this guy wrote Treasure Island. So I got on the bed, piled up the pillows, drew up my knees. I have exercise books. I pinched these from schools I go to. They're really good because the size of paper is quite small, so you feel you've achieved a lot when you've written it. It's really helpful. And they have lines, and I quite like lines because I grew up with lines. It's really important to me. So I have these piles of books, and I sit there with one of these books, and I write, and I write, and I write. And what I discovered is that your shoulders relax because you're properly supported by the pillars. You can adjust your knees forward up so that you can sort of get moving. And here's the good bit. I recommend this to all budding writers. It's a wonderful thing to do because you can go to sleep whenever you feel like it. And you don't feel guilty. You just think, well, I've written a page, I can go to sleep now. And you wake up and on you go. And it's, I don't know, it's sort of easier on the body, and that's really, really important if you're doing it day after day after day. You must be like this, you know. And that whole business of being tense when you write is so inhibiting. Finally, the reason people fail at writing, feel they can't do it, is because of fear. It's because I can't do this. It's lack of confidence. And this is all part of the tension of it. If you can relax, I just find it comes easier. Then it comes like speaking. And as you can hear, as I'm speaking to you now, I'm making lots of mistakes. It doesn't make any difference. You understand roughly what I'm saying. And if you don't, it doesn't matter that much. You know, I mean, the thing is, it's got to matter to you. But the audience, when you're writing, it doesn't matter at all. It's just the story you're telling down onto the page that matters. And you're very much alone in your room, and you've really got to be comfortable. So that's the answer to that question. That person better pay for that answer. It's quite long. And
She's only 10, so I wouldn't, let's not go. There's a question over there in the audience.
Thinking of concepts of peace and reconciliation in Syria, and indeed the warhorse puppet team, what is your view of Little Amal and the fact that she was stoned and barracked when she came into Greece?
Sorry, so embarrassed, did you say?
Stoned and barracked.
When she came through Greece?
When she came through
When
Greece.
she faced the protests and stuff?
Indeed, yes.
Well, I had expected it to happen much more often, is the truth of it. I've been part of the team a bit, in the sense that I've written a story about Little Mao, which is coming up next year. I think it's the most wonderful project in terms of raising awareness. But I knew, and they knew, it was going to be provocative. So there are areas of this country, certainly, and there are areas of Greece and Italy, almost all the way up there, where you would be bound to meet some people who would stand there and saying, actually, we don't like refugees, please really pass on. And others would turn their backs, and did. And there were others who got violent and started throwing, and the police had to be called. Fortunately, that only happened in a few places, but they dealt with it beautifully, because I think the idea they had, the people who were doing it, good chance theatre, I hope can I explain, because they might know, I'm sorry, what we're talking about here. Could you put up your hands if you've heard of this Little Amal? Oh, it's quite good. For those of you who don't know what the heck we're talking about, is this. The same people who made the warhorse puppet, the Joey puppet, were asked by Good Chance Theatre, an extraordinary theatre group, led by Stephen Daldry, the great director. They did a play called Jungle in London, which troubled the world, did terribly, terribly well some time ago. And they thought, what we want to do is to create moving theatre on a scale which hasn't happened before, which makes itself as it goes along. And therefore they needed a refugee. So they went to Handspring Puppets and said, could you create for us a 12-year-old refugee girl? We're calling her Little Amal. Could you create that? And so this 3.5 meter tall, wonderful creature, set off from Turkey and has been walking the 8,000 kilometers or miles, and doesn't matter which, but all the way to Manchester, passing through country after country after country, village after village, town after town, city after city. There were the big moments, of course, which were very important, when she met the Pope in Rome. The wonderful picture, you must try and Google it up, of the Pope smiling up, as if, and it's really interesting, because he is a good man and a humble man. He's smiling as if he's seeing God. Extraordinary, quite extraordinary. He's got this great smile on his face, and you know he can't speak. You know, it's something overwhelming. And this creature is being manipulated by 4 puppeteers and has been making this journey all the way up and coming through communities. They've been very sensible. When they realized there were going to be no welcome and it might create a problem, they walked round the town. It's only when they were surprised, which they were once or twice, by particularly venomous people that there were confrontations. I was worried about it happening in England. You know, we know that where she landed in Folkestone, I think in Kent, I quite expected there to be some people there who would come along, but they didn't. I think the truth is she was so enchanting, and there was an immediate rapport between whoever was there, young people and old people, that I think it was almost, they thought this is not going to do any good if we start attacking Little Amal. So by and large, it's been a peaceful journey. What did you think of it?
I loved it. I mean, I never got to see Little Amal in person, but just watching the images in newspapers, on film.
It's amazing. I got to meet her in Paris when she came through. I was invited to go and read her a story. So I read her, I rather love this, I read her own story, which only half of it had happened yet. And there she was. There's a wonderful picture which I shall treasure the rest of my life, with this huge, huge little Amal looking over my shoulder as I'm sitting there reading a story to 200 French children in French. Clap, 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 clap. In French, but I only discovered afterwards they were refugee children that only about 20% of them understood French. And they all looked very respectful as I was reading this story. They hadn't got a clue what was going on. But it was a wonderful moment, and here's the thing. She was so moving to be near. I hadn't received any instructions as how to treat this creature at all, this human being who was being given life all the time. But they were watching, these puppeteers from inside, my difficulty. And so they reached out towards me, and I found myself embracing this little Amal. And it was just extraordinarily moving, except it hurt my face because it's all bits of cane. And anyway, I'm glad you asked that question. It's been one of the great things the last few months, I think. And I did hope that our Home Secretary would have come along and seen it. You know, I don't think she did. Can't imagine why not.
Very sadly, we're in the last 5 minutes or so. So I've got more online questions. Is there anyone else in the audience got questions? If you can, anyone up on there, I will relay the question through the microphone. So if you want to shout it out. What's your handwriting like?
Who's asked this question? I can't see. Wave.
Right through the lights.
Is that a child? Who is responsible for that child? My handwriting is truly terrible. And it's one of the reasons I had problems at school. If I'm getting a little bit serious about it, I was never any good at writing at school for all sorts of reasons. One was self-confidence, but the other was that I get ticked off a lot and put in the corner in the days when people got put in the corner. And my worst thing was my handwriting. I find it really hard to make my letters, you know. And then when you see lots of red marks through your work, you sort of stop wanting to do it. Now, I'm very lucky in that I have a wife. She's here tonight, so I should say I have a wonderful wife. I've told you of how many years. 57 now, I think, 59 since we met, but 57 years. And she knows my handwriting about as well as she knows me, and therefore interprets it quite well. And she's the person, actually, who very often reads my words and translates them onto something like this. This is called an iPad. I don't know if you've seen this before. It's quite magical. You press a button. Isn't that wonderful? And so what she does is she interprets the handwriting like this, and then she says like this, and it comes onto there, and lo and behold, all I have to do is to do a funny sort of press, put in a code, You've got to put it in the code, it's very important. And then, writing. Isn't that magical? And I didn't do it. I got a wife that done it.
And a lot of your books have got stories about animals in. What aspect of that topic is that you enjoy?
Very good question, and really well asked, because I know what you mean, and it's difficult. But the thing I would say is this, that the animals themselves, I'm fascinated by. I don't understand them any more than you do, but what interests me anyway is the relationship between us and them and us. So, we know what's going on in the world now, you know what's going on in the world now, we know how many species we have destroyed during my lifetime, and we know how many species we're going to destroy if we go on the way we are. That's the big relationship at the moment. The other relationship is personal, that I've been in this wonderful position of working with this charity, Farms and City Children, for most of my working life. I'm probably one of the very, very few writers who have spent their days with children out on a farm, observing not just the animals, but the manner in which they interact with the children and the children interact with them. And I have this extraordinary conviction now of how close we are naturally to our fellow creatures, that children have that instinct to a much greater extent than we have when we get older. We kind of almost learn our way out of it. I've seen the benefits, the huge benefits of confidence flowing between animal and child. I'll give you one example. When I was thinking of writing Warhorse and thinking of trying to get the horse to tell the story, I knew the horse had to tell the story because I wanted this to be a story of the First World War, not about the British or the French or the Germans, or I wanted it from all sides. And I knew I had to have a neutral observer, a horse. And there were a lot of million of horses went from this country were there. Horse and man fought close side by side. So I could have this horse observing. But I thought to myself, Black Beauty, and I thought to myself, be careful of sentimentality. How can you have a talking horse without it being ridiculous? And then one evening I went in to read to the children from London who come down that week. 35 of them, they come for a week on the farm. And I would go up on a Thursday night there last night. And I went up one November night, dark, pitch black pretty much in the yard as I walked into the yard of this Victorian house where they stay to read them a story. And as I walked into the yard, there was one little boy standing just by the stables in his dressing gown and slippers, and it was raining. And I was about to say, Billy, go in, you'll get wet, when I realized who it was. Billy was a boy who came from a school where he had only been there a couple of years, and he had not spoken a single word since he'd been there. Whatever the trauma was, the teachers didn't know. Whatever the problem was, they didn't know. They'd had report after report after report. This child had some awful obstruction in terms of speaking. He didn't speak to his friends or anyone. And I was told at the beginning of the week, don't ask him any questions, leave him be. Just let Billy have a time to himself, and we'll just watch him, you watch him. And it had been like that all week. Billy doesn't speak. So I'm standing there in the darkness, and I'm about to shout to Billy to go inside when he starts talking to the horse. I mean 19 to the dozen talking to the horse. There's not a stutter, there's not a stammer, nothing. Talk. And his hand's up, and he's resting his hand on the neck of this horse. And what you realize, what I realized at the time, was that there was a love, a trust between these two sentient creatures. And the thing that I found quite extraordinary and made me write the book was this. I kind of got it from the child's point of view because I've been a child and I'd seen it before in terms of how the confidence grows with an animal. But what I'd never seen before was the fact that the horse understood it too. No words, you knew from the body language of this horse that horse, called Hebe, she was a Haflinger pony, my wife's favorite horse in the world, I think, she stood there. She knew it was important to stand there and just be there. And I didn't find that sentimental. I found that extraordinary. So I thought, now you can write this story. You've been released to write this story because it has integrity. You know, you're not trying to do anything with this. This is fine. So I hope that illustrates to you how powerful that relationship for me is. And that's one of the reasons I said it was a very good question, because you got me talking. Thank you for your question.
That's a lovely question.
We are running over here, but let's take one more question, shall we?
We've got your...
Yeah.
It's working? Oh, it's working now. Oh, hi.
Who's speaking to me?
I am speaking to you. In 2011, you did a Dimbleby lecture on freeing the children.
Sorry?
A Dimbleby lecture,
Oh,
freeing the children.
that's a really, really long time ago.
2011.
I did, yes.
Yes. Why did you write that, or what was it about?
Why did I write
What was that about, that lecture?
the lecture?
Freeing the children.
Freedom of children.
Yeah, I think that's what it was.
Well,
yes.
okay, fine. I'm
going back 10
glad I'm
years.
asking. I'm trying to remember what it's about. I'll tell you exactly what was in my head and my heart.
Okay.
I'm a teacher. I've been a teacher all my life. Whether it's in a school, which I was for 10 years at the coalface, or out on the farm, where I did exactly the same thing on a farm. What I am convinced of is that we have an education system in this country which inhibits, where there is too much fear, where there are too many tests judging people. For me, the growing up of a child, particularly in the very early years, is about a welcome to life. What teachers should be doing, parents should be doing, we all know this, is in a way to welcome them to the world, to show them the world, to make them feel confident about themselves and the world about them. It is not about the first opportunity testing them as to whether or not they are good at this or good at that. It's providing a background where children can fulfill their potential. It's that that's the most important thing. Because if we are... Thank you. I am rather passionate about it because I feel we've failed, you know? And there are people in this room who, like me, were alive at the time of the 1944 Education Act. And that generation of people did an extraordinary thing. They decided then that a good education was the right of every single child in this country. There are plenty of children in this country who do get a good education, but they also get a fiercely competitive education. Doesn't matter whether it's in the private system or the state system. The competition seems to be the key. Success seems to be the key. And what you do, immediately you create that world, you divide people. So you have people who are successful, you people who are not successful. And what are those people supposed to feel like? And when I was teaching, the one thing that really I was passionate about was not the children, who actually had wonderful parents anyway, who talked to them, who read to them, who took them places. Yes, a teacher can help that along. It was the kids who were getting virtually nothing from home. There was no stimulus from home at all, who were never that interested in the education that was being provided for them, and I couldn't blame them. The only way I could get through to them was by telling a story. If I told them a story that moved them, that held them, then they were all together. All of them were together. Those who hadn't read books before and those who had. They all came together around story making. So I made story making and their own writing, the confidence to tell your own tale, to see the world through your own eyes, to know that you mattered. You know, it's this business of mattering which is so important. We cannot expect children, for instance, any more than we expect ourselves, to care about the environment unless they're given the opportunity to think it's theirs, that this is my responsibility. One of the reasons that we do what we do on the farms is to get these children out of the classroom. You can teach an awful lot in a classroom. I told you, I've been a teacher, I know that. But the big classroom is the world out there, you know? And if you get them out there, and they can walk on a windy hillside, and they can walk on a river and see a heron rising, and you can see buzzards mewing, and you can see a lamb born. If you're connected to all that, what do? You care about it. And when you care about something, you want to look after it. And we've got to break through, and that is not going to be done by simply measuring people and judging people and making people fearful. So I think my lecture point was, you take the fear out of education. That's all.
Michael,
Yeah.
you've been brilliant.
Okay.
As expected. But we have one last little treasure from you, don't we?
What date
treat.
is it today?
It's the 9th.
9th. We've got the 11th of November coming up. I walked through the doors of this building. The first thing I saw was poppies. And everyone sitting here will have their own feelings about that. But as you know, some of you have read Warhorse, you'll know that I've been connected to this festival through the poetry of other people, Siegfried Sassoon and Edward Thomas and Wilfred Owen, all these extraordinary people. I grew up on those poems. And then the fiction, of course, and then writing my own stories about the First World War. There'll be people sitting in this room who will know exactly which relatives of those didn't come back or came back damaged forever. And so the play of Warhorse, when it came out, I found was one of the most extraordinary periods of my life. And part of it was the music. It was a wonderful folk songs. A man called John Tams, who's a great folk singer, who reworked the words of certain folk songs, and they became, if you like, they were, I suppose they were the kind of theme, like which was woven through the whole story on the stage. The singers would come on and they would sing, or they'd be in the background of the music. And the music I loved. So I thought what I'd do is to finish this evening doing something which is very daring, which is to sing to you. You will see, if you look behind you, look behind. This is the gatekeeper. She's looking round at the moment. And what she is now doing is stopping you leave. I love this song. It very much is what Warhorse means to me, written by John Tams. And I'll do my best. I haven't got a band to play with. I'll blow my nose first, that'll make it better.
Tuning up.
Sing you this song. Those of you who've seen the show, if I sing it at all right, you might even recognize it. Please, if I do that, join in. You will know the tune. Maybe you don't know the words. Fading away like the stars in the morning, losing their light in the glorious sun. Thus would we pass from this earth and its toiling, only remembered for what we have done. Only remembered, only remembered, only remembered for what we have done. Thus would we pass from this earth and its toiling, only remembered for what we have done. Horses and men, plowshares and traces, the line on the land in the path of the sun. Season by season we mark nature's graces, only remembered for what we have done. Only the truth that in life we have spoken, only the seed that in life we have sown, these shall pass onwards when we are forgotten, only remembered for what we have done. Only remembered, only remembered, only remembered for what we have done. Thus would we pass from this earth and its toiling, only remembered for what we have done. Who'll sing the anthem, and who will tell the story? Will the line hold? Will it scatter and run? shall we at last be united in glory, only remembered for what we have done. Only remembered, only remembered, only remembered for what we have done. We shall pass onward when we are forgotten, only remembered for what we have done. Only remembered for what we have done.
Michael Morpurgo. And massive thanks to Hannah Gold as well.
Thank you, people.
Thank you. Hannah will be doing some book signings out there. All of Michael's books are signed. Please do go and fill your boots. Thank you.